First tonight, the United States has ordered a guided missile submarine to the Middle East and has told an aircraft carrier strike group to sail to the region more quickly. Fears of a wider conflict have grown since the killing of the Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Iran has blamed Israel and has vowed to retaliate, but correspondents say the crisis has also offered a possible opportunity for a truce in Gaza. Meanwhile, the death toll of an Israeli airstrike on a school compound in Gaza on Saturday is now thought to stand at around 90, according to Hamas officials. The Israeli deny this. At a news conference, an Israeli army spokesperson defended the strike, but there's been criticism from the US, namely the current vice president and maybe future president Kamala Harris.
You know, yet again, there are far too many civilians who've been killed. I mean, Israel has a right to go after the terrorists that are Hamas. But as I have said many, many times, they also have, I believe, an important responsibility to avoid civilian casualties.
Madam Vice President, you've been saying that since October 7th, and that has been the administration's policy for many, many months now. Yeah. As tens of thousands of civilians have been killed, I mean, there are people who are asking for limitations on arms to Israel, any kind of change. What do you say to those folks who are looking for more than we should look out for civilians?
Well, look, first and foremost, and the President and I have been working around this around the clock, we need to get the hostages out. We need a hostage deal and we need a ceasefire. And I can't stress that strongly enough. It needs to get done, the deal needs to get done, and it needs to get done now.
We also have intelligence indications that the terrorist Ashraf Judah, Islamic Jihad's brigade commander of the central camps, was at the compound. This military facility was embedded inside the Al Tabain school building in Gaza City. After we received clear intelligence of the threat posed by these terrorists, and in accordance with international humanitarian law, we took numerous steps to mitigate the risk to civilians, including using aerial surveillance prior to the strike and selecting very precise munitions to avoid civilian casualties.
Israeli Defense Forces spokesman there, and before him, of course, Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States. With more on all this, I'm joined by Arise International correspondent Faith Orr. Welcome back, Faith. Just in terms of events over the weekend, Israel in the last few hours now saying that the strike on a school in Gaza City killed dozens of militants as opposed to civilians. What more can you tell us?
I mean, we always get this from Israel and Hamas, don't we? Israel always says, oh, it was very targeted, only killed Hamas fighters, and Hamas says, well, wait a second, no, there was actually hundreds of civilians sheltering there. What we do know is that schools in Gaza, generally the ones that used to be UN run, are being used as displacement shelters. Of course, people have been displaced all over the Gaza Strip and are sheltering wherever they can. So it would be extremely unlikely if this building was not full of displaced people and was only used by members of Hamas. It would also be extremely unlikely that Hamas would have that many of their fighters congregated in one building. They know how to conduct this war against Israel. They're not going to do that. Having said that, I think the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, as it always does with these things. Perhaps it's not the high number of civilians that Hamas are claiming. It's doubtful that it's the high number of militants that Israel are claiming, though.
Right. And what should we read into that criticism? We saw some of it on the television there from the US Vice President Kamala Harris. Her tone seemed to convey a feeling of frustration and a lack of ability to make any difference on the ground.
I mean, her tone, I think, is very similar to what we're hearing from a lot of Western leaders, isn't it? We've heard this for, since last October. They all say, you need to protect civilians, you need to do this, you need to do that. And then Netanyahu just kind of carries on as he pleases. He will pay lip service to it. He will tell them that there are these targeted attacks, that operations are limited, but the truth on the ground is that almost 40,000 Palestinians are now dead as a result of this war. More than 92,000 of them have been wounded in this time. Around 1.8% of Gaza's entire population has been killed. 75% of the victims are under 30 years old. we're talking so many children that have lost their lives, and the ones that have survived, many of them wounded, very little prospect of a future, schools destroyed, universities destroyed. Where does Gaza go from here is the question. We know that so much of it has been destroyed that even to clear the area of rubble would take decades. How does it rebuild? How do these people continue with their lives? And that is what Western leaders are anxious about.
And that's a very important point you raise about even the rubble being cleared and how much time it's going to take. Obviously, there is now a sort of lame duck presidency in the US where the duck can quack, as somebody said, but it can't fly, and the Israelis know this. But in terms of how the Gaza conflict might be dealt with by Ms. Harris if she wins the election, is there likely to be a gear shift if she becomes president?
I would be surprised to see a huge shift in US policy. Even while Biden criticises the actions there, the weapons still come. Occasionally there's a pause on them. But generally the US is hugely funding a lot of this war. I mean, they are sending some of their military as well. They built that pier, as we know. There is a lot of money from the US going to this. There is a lot of people in the US that wholly back Israel on this issue. It would be surprising to see a huge gear shift if Kamala Harris takes over.
And it is, of course, difficult to know for sure, but we've got today calls from the European allies. You mentioned that earlier, for there to be a further push on a ceasefire, but equally you've got the US sending some pretty heavy naval resources to the region amid all this talk about whether Iran and Hezbollah are going to hit back against Israel. Is there any sense still that really we don't know where this could head?
It's very difficult to know where this is going to head. Hezbollah, for its part, we think they will, and Iran will hit back. I mean, we saw 30 rockets, roughly, fired by Hezbollah into northern Israel today. That wasn't their reaction. That was them testing Israel's air defences. They want to find the vulnerabilities. They've been doing this for some time. So we know that Hezbollah does this. We've heard from their leader, Hassan Nasrallah, and what he has said is we will keep doing small things to keep the Israeli military operating in the north to distract them, essentially. Interestingly, just in the past few hours as well, Iran has also been exhibiting some long-range drones at a military show near Moscow, putting all of these weapons on display as if to say, we are coming for you, Israel. So I think we can expect a reaction. What that reaction is going to be, when it's going to be, that is going to be the question.
And is this arrival of American heavy naval resources likely to act as some sort of deterrent or not? I mean, they're determined to retaliate, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And I think, it's not like, there's going to be, the warship there, but actually the US has had a strike force in the region for some time. It's not like the US isn't there. They are there. I think the US doesn't want things to explode. Israel has been carrying out an exercise today, the largest exercise that we've seen in the north of Israel, essentially preparing for all-out war with Hezbollah, with Lebanon. The US doesn't want to see that happen. I think they want things to calm down on all sides. As for striking Iran, well, if Iran uses long range, it's not, it's unclear what the US weapons there are going to do other than protect Israel, of course.
Right. And the way that many countries believe that this can be ameliorated in the short term, at least, is to get those ceasefire talks going. How is that looking at the moment?
Well, there are more talks scheduled for Thursday. Now, what's interesting about this is that some people are saying, the killing of Ismail Haniyeh being replaced by Yahya Sinwar is actually opening up an avenue for these peace talks. That's not particularly true. Haniyeh was very keen on a deal. He was not the problem. He was never the sticking point. He had actually, on Hamas's behalf, agreed to several proposals. The sticking point was Netanyahu. And now what Sinwar is saying is, we're not sure if we're going to send anyone to these talks on Thursday. We've already agreed to a proposal. We want the US, the other Western powers, to get Israel to implement this ceasefire proposal that we have already agreed to. It's unclear whether Netanyahu has any desire for this deal. We know, of course, he faces a lot of domestic issues that once this war is over, he's actually going to have to face. That includes a trial which could very well land him in prison. So you know, his right-wing government as well, they don't want to concede. They don't want Hamas to have concessions made, to have, you know, humanitarian supplies went in. We heard from Smotrich earlier today, who said that he thinks it's moral and just that children should starve in Gaza, starve to death. So that's what they're contending with. It doesn't seem at this point that Hamas is actually the problem to these talks. It does seem like it's the Israeli far-right people.
Faith, thanks very much indeed. Faith Orr is Arise international correspondent.